Panic sets in. Mark Carney is destroying Canada worse than Trudeau. Disaster unfolding fast. Canada is facing a mounting crisis under Prime Minister Mark Carney, who assumed office after the snap federal election on April 28, 2025, amid hopes for renewed leadership and economic revival. Instead, many Canadians are witnessing political stagnation, missed opportunities, and deepening regional and social divisions. The growing sense of panic reflects fears that Carney's policies and leadership style are accelerating Canada's decline faster than under Justin Trudeau. Citizens from coast to coast express frustration as they watch a government perceived as unable to make tough decisions or unify the country around a clear vision. At the center of this crisis is Carney's approach to national infrastructure and resource development. Despite early promises to unlock Canada's economic potential and improve interprovincial trade, his administration has implemented a policy requiring unanimous approval from First Nations communities for any major infrastructure project, including pipelines and highways. While the policy is framed as a respectful recognition of Indigenous treaty rights, its practical effect has been to grant any single Indigenous group veto power over critical projects. This veto sandbox has turned progress into gridlock, threatening economic growth and frustrating provinces eager to move forward. The consequences of this veto power have been immediate and severe. For example, a proposed pipeline meant to connect Alberta's oil production to Ontario's markets was blocked after Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew cited opposition from local First Nations groups. This move shocked many in the energy sector and government circles, who view these projects as vital to both regional prosperity and national economic health. Rather than stepping in to resolve disputes and push forward a shared vision, Carney's government has appeared hesitant, shifting blame among provinces and Indigenous leaders. This reluctance has only deepened paralysis and bred frustration among Canadians who want action. Carney and his cabinet defend their legislative framework by emphasizing that it strengthens respect for treaties and ensures environmental assessments meet treaty obligations, but without explicitly granting veto power. Critics, however, see this as a semantic sleight of hand. In practice, if any Indigenous community objects, projects stall indefinitely. This ambiguity creates uncertainty and resentment among provinces and industries that crave clear rules and decisive leadership. The cautious language of Carney's administration further fuels fears that the country will remain stuck in endless consultations with no tangible progress. The Indigenous consultation issue is deeply complex and sensitive. Indigenous leaders rightly demand genuine respect and partnership, noting that historic processes have often ignored or undermined their rights. Yet many also warn that the current model risks trapping communities in cycles of economic stagnation and poverty. Critics argue that expanding veto authority without reforms aimed at improving governance, accountability, and economic opportunity within Indigenous communities will perpetuate underdevelopment rather than foster reconciliation and shared prosperity. This debate also raises important questions about fairness and responsibility. Leaders from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba argue that if Indigenous communities have decisive power over major infrastructure projects, they should also be fully integrated into Canada's taxation and economic systems. Persistent concerns about financial mismanagement and poor living conditions in some Indigenous administrations deepen skepticism about expanding political power without concurrent reforms to improve governance and community welfare. The stalled Calgary Ring Road project provides a concrete example of this tension. Initially, First Nations leaders demanded increased financial compensation and threatened to block the road's construction entirely. However, when developers proposed rerouting the project to avoid Indigenous lands, those leaders returned to the negotiating table, illustrating the complex mix of principle and pragmatism at play. Such situations reinforce fears that veto powers can be wielded inconsistently and opportunistically, undermining trust and delaying projects critical to regional growth. Even with the passage of Bill C-5 in June 2025, which grants Carney's cabinet authority to designate projects as in the national interest and fast-track approvals, little concrete progress has been made. Carney's recent meetings with provincial premiers produced no clear pipeline plans or infrastructure roadmaps. His tendency to shift responsibility to provinces and Indigenous groups for ongoing deadlocks only reinforces the perception of weak leadership lacking the vision and determination to break Canada's political and economic logjam. This leadership vacuum has sparked serious political backlash. Resource-rich provinces such as Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba increasingly express frustration that has moved from polite disagreement to open discussion of separation or enhanced autonomy. Their patience has worn thin after years of stalled projects, lost investments, and what they view as a federal government focused more on symbolic gestures than practical solutions. The growing divide between Canada's western provinces and Liberal strongholds in Ontario and Quebec threatens the nation's unity and long-term stability. Carney's leadership style marks a stark contrast with Trudeau's more visible, sometimes flamboyant tenure. Rather than grand gestures or headline-making controversies, Carney governs with quiet bureaucracy and caution. But this subtle approach masks an inability to resolve critical issues. The country feels more fragmented and less governable, with citizens increasingly skeptical of a prime minister who seems to avoid confrontation and difficult decisions, allowing political paralysis to deepen amid widespread dissatisfaction. The unfolding crisis goes beyond infrastructure delays or economic statistics. It signals a deeper loss of confidence in Canada's federal leadership. Canadians want a prime minister who respects Indigenous rights but also pursues national prosperity, someone who can break through political gridlock, make tough calls, and build unity instead of division. So far, Carney has offered reassurance without follow-through, eroding trust and dimming hopes for progress. The urgency of the situation cannot be overstated. Carney's tenure is widely viewed as a disaster unfolding rapidly, threatening to leave Canada more fractured and economically weaker than ever before. Whether this trend can be reversed remains uncertain, but calls for fundamental change grow louder. Some voices even suggest that Ontario and Quebec, the Liberal heartlands, should consider forming their own federation, freeing the rest of Canada to pursue growth without being held back by vetoes and political deadlock. Canada's future depends on more than symbolic consultations and cautious rhetoric. It demands bold, courageous leadership willing to unite the country around shared economic goals while respecting Indigenous rights through meaningful reform and empowerment. Until such leadership emerges, panic will deepen, and the disaster unfolding under Mark Carney's watch will continue threatening the well-being and unity of the nation. The time for decisive action is now.